Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off.
Blast off on another episode of Hero Paranormal Podcast, broadcasting from the base at La Madre Mountain, just south of Area 51. My name is Ryan, the original theological rebel of the airwaves, bringing you an epic episode today. On today's episode, we have one of the most forward-thinking and out-of-the-box theorizing, scientifically minded individuals I've ever had the pleasure of talking to. It is none other than Stephen Myers. He's author of Lost Technologies of the Great Pyramid and also of The Great Pyramid Prosperity Machine. He is an author, lecturer, and independent researcher. Stephen Myers has studied the Great Pyramid for over 20 years to understand how this ancient wonder of the world was built and why. His research included traveling to Egypt to conduct extensive on-site research at the Giza Plateau. Stephen Myers has written numerous magazine articles and given many lectures on the subject of the Great Pyramid, compiling his research into 2 books which provide a comprehensive and detailed explanation of how the Great Pyramid was built, and maybe more importantly, why. He has also founded a non-profit foundation dedicated in understanding how and why the Great Pyramid was built. The mission of this foundation is to develop these ancient but advanced technologies to help our modern but troubled world. The foundation's website is at www.thepump.org. You know, it has been said that science moves forward, a funeral at a time. Why is that said? Well, scientists, often to impress their peers and not appear to be thinking out of the box, go with the flow. No pun intended, but when it comes to thepump.org, that's the opposite. Stephen Myers is going against the grain. He's looking at things from a scientific perspective and analyzing them in a way that no one else has. It's definitely worth a visit to his website, and his books are definitely top flight books that everybody should have in their arsenal of literature. The Giza Plateau has been an area of mystery for quite some time. I love what Stephen Myers brings to the table, and more importantly, I love his out-of-the-box thinking and how he rises to the occasion explaining why the scientific method isn't always that scientific. In fact, a lot of times, scientists are more worried about what their peers think of them than the truth at hand. Stephen Myers, welcome to the Hero Paranormal Podcast.
Thank you for having me on your show. I appreciate this opportunity.
You know, I had you on a while back, and I've been very interested in getting you back on, given all of the information you have on this subject matter, all the research that you've compiled in your books. And I really like, your out-of-the-box theorizing, which it seems as if science, I've heard the saying, science moves forward one funeral at a time. And it does seem as if many scientists and researchers, just to gain the acceptance of their peers, kind of go with the flow, and they don't question the narrative. In fact, I have a uncle who lives in Costa Rica, and he has written various books on the Great Pyramid. And, it's funny how quickly accepted those who just reiterate the same thing and regurgitate the same theories are accepted into this community. Yet I believe that there were advanced technologies. And I think that what you're doing is great. Can we tell listeners how you got involved with this, how this happened, and how you started researching the Great Pyramid?
Well, I do. I research the Great Pyramid. I just have a technical background, if you will, a degree in electronics and amateur radio operator and all of that, but I also have an interest in history. So those two things, if you have an interest in both technology and history, you'll ultimately at least have an interest in the Great Pyramid, which is a very technological structure built in very ancient times. So I read the conventional books, written by Egyptologists and all of that. And I found out a dirty little secret about Egyptology, which is they don't engage in demonstrations. They've never moved the largest stone of the Great Pyramid, a weight like that, 70 tons. They've never moved one 1 inch. They've never made a casing stone that they say was made by people all day long using hand tools. They've never made one. So, Egyptology is a science that does not engage in the scientific method. So I read alternative books about the Great Pyramid being a weapon or some other thing like that. But then I read a book called Pharaoh's Pump, written by Edward Kunkel, who described how the Great Pyramid was assembled using water locks and barges, and that the Great Pyramid actually helped people by being infrastructure and being a water pump. So that's how I got started, and then built on Edward Kunkel's research and wrote a couple of books myself, produced a couple of documentaries, and anyway, here I am.
That is amazing. And I think a lot of people just have that gut feeling that there's more to the pyramids than meets the eye. Yeah, they're magnificent. Yeah, they're fascinating. But that much effort being put into building something like this, there had to be an underlying reason. And that's what I like about your research. I recently found out, I did not know this before, that there was, in fact, a great, I found this out in Bible school back when I was a kid, but I kind of took it with a grain of salt. But it appears that there were massive floods in the villages of Aswan and other areas in Egypt, and this storm may have covered a lot of information. Have you come across this? And one particular maze is what stood out to me, I believe. I can't remember how deep they said this was probably buried under the muddy flood, but this turned my head looking like kind of at a different angle, that a lot of things are nonchalantly just kind of cast at the wayside and people don't look deeper into them.
Well, I know that the Nile had a yearly inundation, sometimes much larger than others. And so certainly, I'm sure a bunch of information and artifacts have been covered up by the silt, if you will, and lost to the sands of time. But that's true. I appreciate your thoughts about the direction of my research, that the Great Pyramid had a huge return on investment that must have been bigger than the cost of building it. Just like a hydroelectric dam, the highways, the power grid, that type of thing. So it must have had a huge return on investment. So one criteria I use to determine people's research is to find out what the return on investment is they feel the Great Pyramid had. If it was like symbolic or pointed to something, that seems like a really small return on investment for such a big project. Or if it was a tomb, even though it doesn't look like a tomb, that's a pretty small return on investment. So I tell people we can build a great big pyramid here in the United States. Might cost $50 billion to build it, but we could symbolically tell people in the future that we knew pi. But the reason why we don't do that is because it would be stupid. And I think the original builders were geniuses, and they didn't build something as big as the Great Pyramid that provided a small return on investment.
Completely accurate. And I don't think that someone who could build such an amazing structure would do so, as you said, without underlying reasons. And I like how comprehensive and detailed an explanation you give in your books about this lost technology. It is, I believe you have a foundation. Is it at www.thepump.org? Is that correct?
That is correct, and that's where you can find out about links to my books, and also there's a free video series about how the Great Pyramid was assembled using water locks and barges. It's very visual, a lot of computer-generated animations, and it shows the systematic production line efficiency of using water locks and barges to assemble the Great Pyramid. So there's a lot of information on our website.
And I want to thank you. You sent me the video, and I've watched it a couple times, and it makes perfect sense. It's similar to the technology, not identical, but similar to the technology used in the locks at the Panama Canal and such. And it's really an efficient way to move practically immovable objects, isn't it?
It is. In modern times, we don't use a magic wand or hum or worship crystals to move our most heaviest objects. We use water locks. We can lift battleships using water locks. And in fact, water locks are not primitive by any means, but the system of choice here in the 21st century to move our largest objects. The Panama Canal that you mentioned was recently expanded with larger water locks. They didn't drag the ships up a ramp, or they didn't use a magic wand to move those heavy objects or sound technology. They used water locks because it actually works in the real world. And I think in ancient times, to move their heaviest objects and heaviest stones of the Great Pyramid, they also used water locks.
And before I forget, you are also offering to a limited amount of guests a Enchanted Egypt tour, a kind of an exclusive and intimate tour, which will feature a lot of these theories and fun activities, and you'll visit many of the ancient and modern sites in the country of Egypt. Could you tell our listeners a little bit about that, since that's coming up?
Yes, I am co-leading this tour with Ramona Miles, and she is a podcaster, a entrepreneur, world traveler. She's been to Egypt. She also has a magazine that she is the publisher of. So she's got a lot going on, and myself are leading this tour, which we're calling the Enchanted Tour of Egypt, and it is from October the 20th of this year to November the 2nd. It's a 13-day tour. 5 of those days will be on one of those ships that cruises along the Nile, and it'll all have, excellent food, excellent accommodations, that type of thing. And we'll go to all the ancient sites that we can, a whole host of them. But to find out more, you can go either to my website at thepump.org, or to sign up for the information about the complete itinerary. You can go to Ramona Miles' website. So that's all listed on my Facebook page, and it's also on, her page. So that's you can go see that. And then also there is a informational video, kind of a promo video, so you can watch that. And you can go to lifealongthenile.com That's lifealongthenile.com, all one word, to find out more about the cruise. And I hope people will sign up. We've just announced it a few days ago, and there's been a lot of interest in this tour.
I think it's great. Thanks for going into that. And the other thing I think is great is kind of viewing this from like an environmentally conscious standpoint, in that this energy efficient, non-polluting energy technology, which was in fact possibly why the Great Pyramid was built, is very conservationally friendly, and it could help our future, couldn't it?
I think so. Our foundation is a humanitarian organization, and we want to change the world. We think the Great Pyramid provided prosperity for the people who built it. It wasn't for any type of Bible prophecy. It wasn't to tell us pie or to bury somebody, but it was infrastructure like a hydroelectric dam. But this would, with that pumped water, you have a alternative method to generate electricity. So if you can pump water cheaply, you can generate electricity cheaply. And we want to redevelop this ancient high technology for our modern but very troubled world. And you don't need a big pyramid or anything. We're using PVC pipe and polypropylene containers and some custom fabrication to redevelop this technology. My second book, The Great Pyramid Prosperity Machine, describes in detail how the passages and chambers of the Great Pyramid were used to pump water, and we want to adapt that technology using modern materials to be able to generate electricity and do other things, of course. So these types of pumps could be either a community or for individuals on farms, that type of thing. So we're working on it. Funding has been an issue, and it's our most funding intense activity of our foundation. So if people are interested in finding out about that aspect of our research, they can contact us through our website at thepump.org.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that the pyramids are not tombs, because this was a widely held theory for quite some time. And when it was disproven, I found it very interesting that it was just kind of brushed under the rug, and they moved on with the next narrative, which is that it took 20,000 people 20 years to build the Great Pyramid of Giza, which consists out of 2.3 million stone blocks, each of them weighing up to 10 tons. Now that's 20,000 workmen. 15,000 of them worked 12 hours a day to make this number possible for 3 months, and then went back to their villages, and then new builders would replace them. And this is almost as far-fetched, in my opinion, as the original theory that the pyramids were tombs.
Well, the idea that the pyramids are tombs has not been rejected by certainly everybody. Boston University hasn't rejected that idea. You can still get a degree in Egyptology from the Boston University. And they tell those stories about all the workers with the strong back muscles, and they tell the stories about workers doing extremely precise, large-scale stone cutting with copper chisels, and they don't provide any demonstrations, of course, because it's impossible. And so you can, the idea, they still write books that are published by major book publishing companies about the Great Pyramid being built by all these idiotic workers dragging stones up a ramp. So shame on the Boston University, shame on them and other universities around the world. In fact, I'm glad that I don't have a degree from the Boston University, because if I did, it would undermine my credence, undermine my credibility, if you will. So it would be like handing out a a degree in phrenology, that study of the bumps on people's heads and how they relate to character traits.
Mm-hmm.
But it's science advances funeral by funeral. But a lot of people reject that idea anymore, about the ramp and the workers, because it can't be done. There's another idea that's been rejected, which is cows jumping over the moon. And you can read about it in literature, and there's stories, oral traditions about cows jumping over the moon. But people have rejected it because you can't demonstrate it. That's the same thing about most of what Egyptologists say. It literally cannot be demonstrated in the real world. So, so it takes a while. It takes generations for science to get caught up with truth. Isn't that interesting?
It is. And I just find it magnificent that from all the countless theories that have tried to explain the true purpose of the Great Pyramid of Giza, the most accepted one was in fact that this structure was built to safeguard the pharaoh's body in the afterlife, yet there's absolutely no proof of that.
That's true. Certainly there has been no original mummy from any pyramid that survived to modern times. Many of the pharaohs were buried in the Valley of the Kings, in other words, in holes in the ground, not in a big pyramid. So, it's just a made-up story. Egyptology got its start from tomb robbers, if you will. And if you're a tomb robber, and, whatever you encounter is a tomb. If you're a hammer, the world is a nail. Mm-hmm. So they say, well, the Great Pyramid, it must have been a tomb because the mummy and all the golden treasure is gone, so it was stolen before us Egyptologists could steal it. And since there's no evidence for it, that proves that it's a tomb.
Yeah, and I find it, there's so many pieces of the puzzle missing. I mean, you look at the tomb of Tutankhamun, for example, and his tomb is intricately carved with colorful walls depicting various scenes, beautifully finished, hieroglyphics, and yet there are these undecorated tombs within the pyramids, which are claimed to be the same, and they look nothing like that of, as you mentioned, the Valley of the Kings. So it's just, and that's just one part of it. And it's just curious. It's very curious that this is something that is widespread and still believed. And it just reeks of disinformation to me.
Oh, it is. It really is. So, and what makes it reek is the really poor research methods used by Egyptologists. I have created a video called "Is Egyptology a Pseudoscience?" It's on my YouTube channel. You can get to it from thepump.org. And it's a lot of people have said that was a very powerful video, so I hope people watch that. But yeah, temples in ancient Egypt are adorned on every surface with writing, but the tomb of a pharaoh, like the Great Pyramid, has no writing. It's interesting. Inside your car engine, there's just a few, like maybe part numbers, but there's no writing inside the cylinders or inside of it because it's a machine. It doesn't need writing. And it's the same with the Great Pyramid. It doesn't need a bunch of hieroglyphs inside and doesn't have hieroglyphs inside. So it's a researcher should do two things. One, seek the truth, but also to destroy falsehoods. And you have to do both ends of the spectrum to make any kind of a difference. I know some researchers who say, "Oh, everybody's got a piece of the puzzle." No, everybody doesn't have a piece of the puzzle. Each explanation of the Great Pyramid is either correct or incorrect, and you need to make a distinction between the two. So I know that not long ago, there was a big idea that the Great Pyramid confirmed a Bible prophecy and also confirmed the birthplace of Jesus and all of that. But that has mostly been rejected by people, except for a few religious zealots, because the foundational research methods are so flawed for the research that they've come up with. So it's been a battle trying to, but it always has been. It's always been a battle in terms of research and science. It's not the unbiased guys in lab coats that people make science out to be. It's a real messy place.
And it's often, the hostility of science comes on to anyone that has theories outside the box and, think that maybe a bunch of simple slaves could have organized the infrastructure, developed the math, cut, carry, and place all these stones, building over 100 pyramids. And, it's amazing to me and a bit offensive that science quickly and very, very rudely will try to snuff out any new theories. And why is that? Why is science so stuck on what it's stuck on? Why is it so stuck on the path and unwilling to look at things outside of the box?
It's the nature of humanity. It's our nature. We're a lot different than a computer hard drive. If you have new information, you just write over the old hard drive. But with people, with humans, you and I, everybody, once you learn something, it is almost insurmountable to reject what you thought was true and accept a higher truth. It is just the nature of human beings. But science is institutionally against the advancement of science. Let me put it that way. People say trust the science. Oh my golly, that's the least scientific statement that's ever been made. But it's not just me with an idea that the Great Pyramid could actually help people in a tangible way. It was everybody. Nikola Tesla. There was so much with the scientific community against alternating current. They were against that. They didn't believe it worked and all of that. The guy that figured out penicillin, Alexander Fleming, he was fought by the medical community. How could a botanist come up with a medicine? Well, he's not an expert, and that type of thing. So finally, penicillin was accepted, and that's a very fascinating story. It took like 20 years. The Wright brothers were, demeaned, and they fought. You can't have a heavier than air aircraft. When they were flying, people said, "Oh, that's not flying. It's just like bouncing off the ground and kind of like a ball goes in the air." So it's and other people in modern times, Dr. Robert Schoch, who said the Sphinx is older than what Egyptologists have come up with. He was viscerated and character assassination by Egyptologists, as well as Graham Hancock, who talks, about other stuff, but he as well has been viscerated by Egyptology. I mean, Egyptology is known for not being able to play well with others, if you will. And, it shouldn't be that way. It should be, the science comes first, but it isn't that way. And, again, science advances funeral by funeral, as you say. And the reason why scientists fight so viciously about what they think is true is because the stakes are so small, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
What they think doesn't really matter. So, and they have a lot of, science isn't always a very good example of the use of proper scientific method. Scientists rely on the appeal to authority. In other words, if an expert says something, then that makes it true, which isn't true. That's not science. And they also like to do circular reasoning. If it's in science says, well, if it's in a scientific journal, then that gives it validity. But it's not. It's only going to be in a scientific journal if it already agrees with what we think. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. And speaking of that circular thinking, that kind of brings me to my next question, which is this Orion correlation theory. And can you go into that a bit and explain to listeners just how that is just as far-fetched as building anything and saying it points to the stars?
I appreciate your question. Yeah. There's a popular theory now, a correlation theory associated with the Great Pyramid, which has replaced the biblical correlation theory, which is also known as pyramidology. That compared the Bible with the Great Pyramid, and they came up with all these correlations. Well, the Orion correlation theory uses the same flawed research methods, and they come up with these correlations that they think are valid because they're precise. And mathematical precision doesn't validate a correlation at all. So, there's 4 beetles, and there's also 4 sides to the Great Pyramid. So there's some sort of causal relationship because the math is precise, but no, that's not true. So, but they come up with kind of a convoluted story about the Great Pyramid having to do something with stars. The vents point to Orion, except because of the precession of the equinoxes, or the grand precession, if you will. The sky moves 1 degree every 72 years. So the vents are not pointing to those stars. They're pointing to other stars now. But they say, well, no, it's just a certain time that it has to point to those stars. And then it gets all convoluted. And again, correlations with no causation, if you will. Causation is an additional piece of evidence that provides a link between the two things being compared, if you will. And there is no feature that's specific to the Great Pyramid that indicates the original builders had any intention of having a relationship between the Great Pyramid and stars. And people say, well, it points to stars. Well, it's not pointing to those stars. Let's examine 2 data points. The vents are not pointing to those stars, so that means that they're trying to tell us symbolically that the Great Pyramid has nothing to do with stars. Well, that's an interpretation of evidence, and those correlations they came up with in the Orion correlation theory aren't evidence. They are interpretations of evidence. So it's a theory in crisis. You can't get them to talk about research methods. They can't say what validates a correlation, but it's almost like a cult, if you will. And, it's just another thing that people are battling. All hydroelectric dams have passages that point to stars. And then you can make up, with increasing all these variables, using any system of measurements you want, and making up stuff, fiddling with the numbers, and you can come up with correlations between, all kinds of stuff. So it's something to consider. I'm already against the next correlation theory on the Great Pyramid, but you can't get them to talk about research methods. I created a video that's called Questions You Won't Answer If You Believe the Orion Correlation Theory on my YouTube channel. And it's a series of questions that if you believe that theory, you're not going to answer those questions. And they all relate to research methods. So, people have ideas and they come up with stuff, and then they are analyzed and see if they are valid or not. And I think the Orion correlation theory in its entirety is invalid.
And another interesting, from an architectural perspective, the elements of a triangle, it's considered to be one of the strongest, if not the strongest shape. And it has strong support in a variety of different schools, including mystery schools, Freemasonry. A lot of secret societies tend to historically look at these pyramids as an entry point of illumination into the world. And let's talk about that and why these triangles are such strong shapes, not just architecturally, but why so many different schools of thought point back to the pyramids in Egypt as the beginning of almost a renaissance of intelligence.
Well, the Great Pyramid is a puzzle with a lot of pieces missing. And in medieval times and the Renaissance, they looked at Egypt, in terms of mystery schools and sacred knowledge and all of that. But a lot of Europeans also looked at the Bible. So they in the Bible, it says there's big buildings in Egypt that are granaries. So that's what the Bible says. So they say, well, these great pyramids were granaries, literal granaries. But then they altered that to say, oh, no, it's a granary or a storehouse of sacred knowledge. But it's just they're just trying to figure out what that structure was for, grasping for straws. It's just like if we came across a hydroelectric dam that had been abandoned and for 10,000 years, let's say, and the course of rivers changed, so you'd have this great big structure in the middle of the desert, in a cavern, like a canyon, okay? But there's no river. Well, if we didn't know about the technology of hydroelectric dams, we'd say, well, maybe it has a symbolic purpose. And these vents do point to stars. I mean, you can see that. And there's places where you could bury kings and that type of thing. So, and then in the adjoining area, you would see arrowheads. Oh, arrowheads. Well, that's the culture that built it because it's right here in the area. So they must have used baskets and made concrete and hauled all this wet concrete up to up a big ramp and made this dam for symbolic purposes. So people have tried to do that, but triangles are strong architecturally, and each side of the Great Pyramid is like a triangle, if you will. But I think it's more like 4 hydroelectric dams that are like back to back, if you will, like a big square. They're all, and then there was like a pond in the middle during construction, and that's what justifies the shape of the Great Pyramid, and all that is described in our video series on our website. So that's why they are triangles, as for just an architectural purpose, not for symbolic or esoteric reasoning.
Yes, and I find it interesting that, even the Smithsonian, a variety of highly regarded organizations, have pointed towards some of this woo, or the neuropsychiatric effects of being within the pyramid. And there's a story of, I'm sure you've heard it, of Napoleon Bonaparte, where Napoleon supposedly entered the pyramid for the evening alone, and having ventured into the pyramid and navigating all these cramped passages, supposedly armed with nothing but a candle, he said nothing when he came out, but he was visibly shaken, and didn't say anything until his deathbed, when he said, "Oh, what's the use?" he murmured, sinking back. "You'd never believe me." And I think that just the fact that this type of rhetoric, lends to this effect, this neurological effect that the structure has on people. Is it just an intimidating structure and people jump to conclusions, in your opinion, or is there something to that?
Well, I think it's again the grasping for straws and people that have a tendency towards, if I can say this, the woo-woo stuff. Associate a lot of that with the Great Pyramid. There's the idea of Napoleon. Let's say you were Napoleon. Now think about this.
Mm-hmm.
And you spent the night in the Great Pyramid in the King's Chamber. You're not going to come out and say, I'm Napoleon, but nothing happened. It was no big deal. You're going to come out and say, or indicate that something magnificent or mysterious happened. They have their image to maintain, if you will. So I think I don't know. I've laid in the coffer in the King's Chamber, very uncomfortable. So, but just because you can lay in a box doesn't mean that it was a tomb or a coffin. Behind every Sears store, they have boxes that refrigerators come in, and you can lay in them. So the intent of the builders of those boxes is not for people to lay in them, even though people can. So, yeah, there's a lot of woo-woo stuff and measuring the Great Pyramid to divine meaning. I have a bicycle that if you measure it in just a certain way, it will exhibit pi, the wheels around, okay? So it exhibits pi, but was that the intent of the builders for the purpose of that bicycle? No. There's two wheels, and they're round, so that doesn't symbolically tell us that the Earth is round and spins on its axis. So that there's a day and a night, the duality of the universe. You can make all this stuff up, but that's not the intent of a bicycle. So people come up with stuff and they interpret evidence, and a lot of people do that. But the interpretation of evidence can be analyzed, and it can be accepted or rejected based on its validity or not.
And do you think that there is a lot of people mention that, the answers must lie within the Vatican just because of connections to the Roman Empire and the pharaohs of Egypt through Karnak priests, etc. Is this far-fetched? Do you think they know the answer, or is this just, again, more of that woo where people are trying to theorize about something that they can't figure out?
Well, that's a great statement. The Vatican has a large library. I'm certainly in the Middle Ages, they were all powerful and gathered up all types of material, valuable possessions. But, I think that makes sense. The best way to prove that, right or wrong, is to find the answers about the Great Pyramid in the Vatican. And that's difficult to do. A lot of it is in Greek and Latin, if you will. A lot of it's unavailable to us peasants. So, but even if the answer is in the Vatican, it is the honor and duty of modern day researchers to understand how and why the Great Pyramid was built. How and why it was built was common knowledge and was understood when it was built. They knew why it was built. They saw it being built. They understood the financing, or, what justified paying that huge cost to build it. So it's knowable by humans. And now in modern times, our duty as researchers is to find out what common people knew back when it was being built.
Yeah. And, I find it interesting how quickly history can be changed. I mean, just in my lifetime, kind of leading back to this science being able to do whatever they want, really. History has been changed in my lifetime. I was brought up when I was a child believing that dinosaurs were just big lizards. And I recently went to the museum with my two toddlers, and those big lizards now have feathers, and they're pretty much just kind of big birds. And as silly as that sounds, I mean, that's just one generation. That's a huge, huge step in just one generation to changing the narrative. And it just, makes me realize how quickly history can be forgotten, burned to the ground, and rewritten.
Oh, that's true. It's also written by the winners. The truth is a variable, ever changing like the seasons, mutable to fit the times. If the Nazis won World War II, history books would be quite a bit different. So, if the South won the Civil War, the history books would be quite a bit different. So, yeah. And also in science, who writes the science textbooks? Well, the people that have peer review, and peer review is actually circular reasoning, because our peers agree with what we say, so we're going to get peer review, and they validate what we say because we think what they think, and it's circular reasoning. So those are the people that write the textbooks that still say there was a big ramp, or that still say precision stone cutting was done using hand tools, even though it can't be done in the real world. So, it's history changes. That's why they got to have new history books, and the future's going to change. We're in a revolution of thought and ideas and understandings, and slowly but surely the old ideas are dying off, funeral by funeral, just as the old ideas about the Great Pyramid being a granary is dying off, even though a recent candidate for president of the United States, Ben Carson, there's a video of him talking about the Great Pyramid being a granary. So these old ideas die hard, they really do. And in everything, social things like slavery and race, the Civil War has been over here in the United States for over 100 years, and we're still having issues with race. And, it all takes time. So, but I'm in it for the long haul. And I think I'm on the right side of history, if you will, by rejecting much of what Egyptologists have come up with, rejecting certainly the Orion correlation theory and that type of thing, but offering a new understanding of how brilliant the original builders were. They weren't primitive in any way, and how this great big structure had a great big return on investment. And this ancient high technology can help our modern world, in many ways.
I'm so glad that you brought up the circular thinking, because as you mentioned, if this was the peer review that the Wright brothers would have used, we never would have created the airplane, as humanity would never have flown. And you brought up another thing which I find so great, which is these copper alloy objects, which have been excavated and being touted as the metal tools of the pyramid builders. I mean, you look at these things and it seems incomprehensible that these would be capable of doing what was done. As we kind of wrap up here and before we finish, let's go ahead and tell listeners about your books, The Lost Technologies of the Great Pyramid and The Great Pyramid Prosperity Machine, where they can get them, how they can read them, and any other articles, etc., that you'd like to mention.
Oh, I've written 2 books. that's on the theme of the Great Pyramid and how it's built and why it's built. It's kind of a division, a natural division of the research. You know, like let's say a Model T Ford. Well, how it was assembled is real interesting, and how it was used, you know, back in the day. That's interesting too. So my first book is about how the Great Pyramid was assembled. And my second book is why it was assembled, or how it was used as a machine to provide prosperity for those who built it. And both are available from Amazon in softcover or Kindle ebook format. So I've also produced 2 documentaries, and don't go out and buy them, because I'm going to make them available on YouTube. One of them already is available on YouTube, and I just haven't gotten the other one available. So there's a lot of information there. Go to our website, and you'll find out all the links to my Facebook page, my YouTube channel that has a lot of stuff on there, and also our the main fun thing that we're doing is our tour to Egypt, which is coming up in just a few months. So space is limited, only 18 people, plus our 2 co-hosts, and Ramona Miles and myself. And find out about that if you're interested. And if anyone has any questions or comments or thoughts, or want to become involved with what we're doing, they can contact me through my website at thepump.org.
That is great. And Mr. Myers, where can people, I was really impressed by your DVD documentary, where can people get their hands on those?
Well, I appreciate that. I have some that here, and we were selling those on Amazon, but we've stopped selling those because we're going to make them available to the public for free. So that's what we're working on. We're going to make ISO files, if you will, that they can download and burn it to a DVD if they want to, but also they could view the videos for both of those documentaries on our YouTube channel. We're just trying to disseminate information. A lot of people in third world countries, you know, can't afford to buy, a DVD from, from the West, if I can put it that way. So we're just going to make them available, and we're in the process of doing that. And they can download them and burn them as a DVD and hand them out, or just watch them on YouTube. So we're a nonprofit foundation, and if people think that there's any value in our research, they can visit our website, see what our goals and activities are, and become involved. So I hope this our little conversation has whetted the interest of people, where they can find out more. There's a lot to it. So I just ask people to maybe read the books and, consider the information the books contain.
Well, I think that's really encouraging and authentic of you to be so selfless in your research, all the time you've put into it. And, in a time where it seems like, especially in the fields I look at, people seem to only be motivated by the what's in it for me. They just don't want to do things unless it includes a television show or payment of some sort, or the what's in it for me attitude. I just really want to say thanks for your selfless research, and I think it's very authentic of you and very noble. So appreciate that.
Well, thank you. It's certainly not a get-rich-quick scheme by any means, being a researcher. But again, as a researcher, I just assume other people are, and hopefully they will, get off Facebook and read read a book, if you will. That's what the revolution looks like. Not people with weapons, but the revolution is people reading books, if you will. So that's that's what we're up to. I'm working on a third book on the same subject. So, but shows like this help disseminate this information and give people an alternative explanation of the Great Pyramid. Certainly different than it being symbolic or for a funeral or anything like that. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to be on your show again, and hopefully we'll do this again at a later date.
Yeah, I feel like we just scratched the surface on the first one, and we got into deeper questions on this one, and I definitely have more questions I want to get into, so I would love to have you on again. You mentioned your YouTube channel. Could you also tell listeners where they can find you on YouTube?
Well, the best way is to just go to my my website and then click on the link. So, but if you word search me, Stephen Myers, there's probably 5,000 Stephen Myerses on YouTube. So go to thepump.org, and the link is real prominent, and click on it and go to my YouTube channel.
Thanks so much for explaining that. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today, and wish you best of luck in all your endeavors, and looking forward to hearing how the amazing trip to Egypt goes, this most recent one.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll be back and discuss that. It's going to be a blast. It's low key fun, but we're going to see a lot of sights. The new museum in Cairo, probably the best museum of its type in the world. Certainly the Great Pyramid, and cruise on the Nile. So I hope that sparks some interest in some people for this wonderful trip of a lifetime.
It really sounds like it. And thanks so much, Mr. Myers. Can't wait to talk to you again, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Ryan.
Stephen Myers, ladies and gentlemen, one of the most selfless researchers out there, doing the thing for all the right reasons and not paying attention to those that are trying to limit any out-of-the-box theories regarding the pyramids of Egypt. There is a shift happening in research, and I think that science knows this. Things are changing, and Stephen Myers is one of those people that is changing things. So definitely check out thepump.org, click on his YouTube channel, buy his books on Amazon, and support Mr. Myers. He's doing a great thing, and he's pushing the boundaries of science. Man, if I was able to, I would go on his Egypt tour. I'm sure it will impress the most diehard researchers. Unfortunately, I've got a couple toddlers right now, and that just doesn't fit in the equation. But if I were to go to Egypt anytime soon, it would be with Mr. Myers or someone of that caliber. So until next time, keep your eyes to the skies, feet on the ground, but don't forget to take a look around.
Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Visine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Visine. Blast off, blast off.